The idea from our disadvantages that we have discussed in the past, that how do we transit from our traditional budget to zero base. Now we have understood what is zero based budgeting, and by this time you might have already experienced that, um, or by then you have a clear understanding of how typically and difficult the zero based budgeting can be to apply. It is a time consuming exercise. It requires a lot of energy. It requires a lot of analysis. So how can we just move from traditional budget as of today to zero based budgeting completely? We cannot, because we need a lot of resources, and it will stuck down the process of making the budget completely, right? So instead of transitioning 100% from the traditional budget to zero based budget, the best practice I have followed in my organizations in the past is that we move uh, slowly, right? We move in a phased manner. So what do we do is we identify the key area first and the department where zero based budgeting can be applied or is should be applied based on the magnitude of activities. So, for example, the key activity which definitely is the most easiest and the most effective is going to be the sales and marketing. How are we approaching our customers? Do we really need to have a new something new in the customer service? Do we really need to spend on on the channels where we are marketing as of now? Because of the changing customer behavior, because of the changing market segments, because of the changing effectiveness of the different medias, a new technology, a new app, a new way of approaching the customers is arriving into the market. So we need to apply, we need to have that kind of approach. So for me, when I applied the zero based budgeting for the first time, I applied immediately to the sales and marketing. That was the first area, and the second area was the labor force. Even though the labor force is in most of the organizations, especially manufacturing service industries, labor force could be the largest cost that the business is having, apart from the any other cost of direct cost of sales. So the labor cost being the one of the prominent cost for the business, we apply zero based budgeting for labor as well. So how we apply that in if for example in hotels, we look at how much would be the occupancy, what is this employee is going to add the value to the overall operations, overall customer satisfaction, overall cost management, overall process optimization, and the standard that we want to achieve. We applying zero based budgeting does not require us to ignore the standards that we have set for organization. In rather than we apply those standards, but we just relook at our manning and say, do we really need this? To give you an example, most of the hotels where we have let's say 12 people or 10 people in a department serving customers, we reduce it down to half. And how we do it, we look at the activities what they were performing, whether it's helpful or not. We don't, if it's not, we just cut it out, and then by that we reduce their scope of work to manageable ways, that we were able to reduce the headcount itself. So that's the one way of another way of applying the zero based budgeting. So the first process of the transitioning from the traditional budget to zero based budget would be, the first is to identify the key areas and departments where we can apply zero based budgeting. It could be sales and marketing, it could be labor force, and then you could apply into the cost of construction, cost of materials, type of materials, and the process of manufacturing if it's really a heavy cost. And then so we look at the revenue generating departments, we look at department posting continuous losses. So this is one of the some of the criteria that you can look at, you can consider. Revenue generating departments, customer service departments, departments which are posting continuous loss. So for that, we need to know which departments are having losses on a continuous basis, right? And then which are the activities which are costing, let's say X amount of percentage, let's say 2% or 5% of our total budget. we can apply our activities, our zero-based budgeting to those activities, and the rest of them we can just follow the traditional method. Expenses which are continuously increasing. For example, like we choose labor because the labor costs continue to increase because every year we have to adjust the salary based on the minimum wage, based on the inflation, because of the number of years of the peoples in the business, the costs continue to increase over a period of time. So, controlling that cost was very, very important for the survival of the business. So, we choose to apply zero-based budgeting for our manning. So, we looked at all the positions, all the tasks they need to do, and can we do it with a lower manning or not. So it's not that just a simple spreadsheet and we say, okay, let's reduce from 2 to 1. We also have to look at the scope of work that they are doing, and we have to reduce them, because just only reducing the manpower without reducing unnecessary processes is not going to help the business. Then the second step in the transition would be to apply the zero-based budgeting to the areas that we have identified, right? Whether it's marketing, whether it's activity, the cost of the labor cost, or whether it's any other amenities cost, uh, or the operational processes cost, or the administrative cost, and rentals, or anything else. We need to apply the zero-based budgeting step and see what are the most viable options, and how we can optimize the resource allocation in the organization. And then we evaluate the current process by asking usually the five layered why. Now, five layered why means usually we ask why until we reach the root cause. So that's one way of identifying the zero-based budgeting, identifying the alternative for our processes. To give you an example, we looked at our why and say why we cannot manage with X amount of people. Then we identified, oh, why? Because we have certain processes to maintain. Then the next question was why we cannot automate it, or why we cannot remove it. Then another reason came up. And then we ask again, why is that cannot be solved? So normally it's a five layered why. Sometimes you get answer the root cause in three whys or four whys, and sometimes you have to go up to five or six. But generally, that's the maximum. You don't need to require. Then once we know the root cause, then we create the alternative solutions, carry out the cost and benefit evaluation for the difference for the alternative options, alternative solutions, and then we select the best option based on the standards. And the rest of the area, we can follow the traditional method of what we have been doing in the normal process. So that's not a very difficult process for the organization. So we usually follow the traditional budget for the rest of the areas, so that it's easier for the organization to achieve the budget within a time. So it helps this process helps helps to time frame, helps to reduce the impact of the budgeting process from 2 months to maybe 3 months, but it's not going to double it, right? So and usually we since we know that we are going to apply the zero based budgeting to certain areas, we start early. So let's say if the for the next year budget now is we are in October, we normally start the next year budget now because it takes 2 months. So by the time December ends, we have a budget for the next calendar year. So if we know that we are going to apply the zero-based budgeting for certain departments, we would start in September for those particular departments, and then we carry out the process of the identifying the solutions, finding the alternative cost, finding the cost and benefit of certain of the processes, and then we will carry do the budgeting. So this requires a lot of scenario planning. It requires a lot of evaluation, financial modeling to create the alternative options for different decisions, and integrating together with the overall budget. So that was the transition from traditional budget to the zero-based budget. And then finally, we combine the budget to get a complete business plan. In the business plan, you have identified already what are the options that you're going to do, by when you need to do, what would be the price, who would be responsible for it, and how we are going to change from our existing process to the next process. Because that's the changeover is a very, very important aspect in zero-based budgeting, because we are changing almost every year. So it keeps the organization on foot to save it from being complacent, and say that we are now changing from for a good, from being following certain routes to another principles, in order to save the cost, in order to increase the revenue, in order to stay relevant in the market.